For centuries, a silent sentinel has stood amidst the ancient grandeur of Rome, its towering dome a beacon of faith, its labyrinthine archives a repository of history. The Vatican, a sovereign state smaller than some English market towns, yet wielding a spiritual influence that spans continents, has long been a subject of both profound reverence and intense speculation. What if, beyond the hushed cloisters and sacred texts, beyond the dogma and the solemn rituals, lay a secret so cataclysmic it could redefine not just Christianity, but the very origins of humanity? A revelation so earth-shattering that its deliberate suppression, its careful concealment over millennia, would expose a truth more profound and disturbing than any modern conspiracy theory. We are speaking of the Anunnaki, ancient beings whose very existence, if proven, would shatter the foundations of conventional history and religious understanding. This is not merely a tale of forgotten gods or ancient myths. It is an investigation into what the Holy See might know and why it has gone to such extraordinary lengths to keep it buried. Consider for a moment the sheer audacity of such a claim, that the spiritual heart of Western civilization, the supposed guardian of divine truth, might be meticulously shielding evidence of extraterrestrial architects of human destiny. It's a notion that would send shivers down the spine of even the most steadfast believer, prompting a profound re-evaluation of every sermon, every scripture, every cherished belief. The very thought evokes a dizzying sense of unease, a gnawing curiosity that demands answers. What would you do, truly, if you discovered that everything you believed about creation, about the divine, about our place in the cosmos, was not merely incomplete, but fundamentally skewed by a deliberate act of obfuscation, orchestrated from within the hallowed halls of power? The implications are staggering, stretching from the deepest recesses of ancient Sumer to the marble-lined corridors of the Apostolic Palace, and perhaps even into the very fabric of our modern existential quandaries. The weight of such a secret, the sheer magnitude of its potential impact, is almost too much to contemplate. Yet it is precisely this weight that has propelled dedicated individuals to peer beyond the veil of official narratives, to seek out the faint whispers of a suppressed history that refuses to be silenced entirely. The Vatican, for all its visible majesty and spiritual authority, presents an enigmatic facade, hinting at untold stories hidden within its monumental structure. Stories that challenge the very narratives it so vigorously champions. If this beginning has already compelled you to rethink what you thought you knew, just imagine the revelations that lie ahead, meticulously unwrapped, piece by painful piece. So go on, give us a like right now, and hit that subscribe button, because here on this channel, every single video aims to peel back the layers of accepted truth, exposing narratives that very few dare to bring into the harsh light of scrutiny. This journey is far from over. In fact, we've only just begun to scratch the surface of a mystery that promises to unravel everything. The name Anunnaki itself resonates with an ancient, almost primordial power, echoing from the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. In the pantheon of Sumerian mythology, they were the great gods, the princely offspring, or those who from heaven to earth came. These were not abstract deities, mere personifications of natural forces. They were depicted with distinct forms, often winged, possessing advanced knowledge, and interacting directly with early humanity. Their stories, etched into clay tablets thousands of years ago, speak of a time when these beings descended from the heavens, establishing cities, teaching agriculture, crafting tools, and even, as some interpretations suggest, genetically engineering early humans as a slave race to mine gold. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, these foundational texts, predating much of what we consider modern history, paint a vivid, if often perplexing, picture of powerful entities dictating the course of nascent human societies. For Orthodox scholars, these narratives are rich mythological allegories, reflections of early man's struggle to understand the cosmos and their place within it. They are symbolic, poetic expressions of existential wonder, not literal historical accounts. Yet for a growing number of revisionist historians and independent researchers, the sheer specificity of the Sumerian descriptions, the detailed accounts of their arrival, their technologies, and their hierarchical structures suggests something far more concrete than mere metaphor. They point to accounts of sky chariots, of beings who could cross the heavens like birds, of advanced tools and architectural feats that defy conventional explanations for Stone Age civilizations. Take, for instance, the intricate irrigation systems developed by the Sumerians, which transformed arid lands into fertile agricultural centers, enabling the birth of urban living. Was this purely human ingenuity, or did it spring from the tutelage of beings who possessed a far superior understanding of engineering and hydrology? The precision of their astronomical observations, including knowledge of planets beyond what was visible to the naked eye, presents another perplexing anomaly. How did they chart the orbits of distant celestial bodies with such accuracy, without telescopes or advanced mathematical models? These are questions that gnaw at the edges of accepted archaeological narratives, like persistent whispers in the hallowed halls of academic institutions. The narrative surrounding the Anunnaki suggests a pre-human presence, a guiding hand, or perhaps even a forceful intervention that shaped our earliest ancestors. If their existence was indeed historical, not mythical, it would imply a radically different understanding of evolution, of consciousness, and of the very purpose of human life. The very idea that our earliest known civilizations were not solely the product of indigenous development, but rather the result of an engineered kickstart from a non-terrestrial intelligence, is a paradigm shift of monumental proportions. This is where the Vatican enters the frame, not merely as a bystander or an observer, but potentially as a key player in the narrative of suppression. Its unparalleled collection of ancient texts, spanning thousands of years and countless cultures, is the envy of historians worldwide. The Vatican Apostolic Library alone holds some of the rarest and most significant manuscripts, codices, and historical documents known to man. It is a repository of human knowledge that few can access, and even fewer fully comprehend. Its sheer volume suggests a vast, almost unfathomable wealth of information. The secrecy surrounding certain parts of its archives, often cited as being for preservation or security, fuels the persistent whispers of deeper, more profound reasons for limited access. For centuries, the Vatican has positioned itself as the sole authoritative interpreter of divine truth, the unshakable foundation of Christian faith. Its doctrine, its history, its very authority rests on a specific narrative of creation, of human origin, and of divine intervention. Any discovery that fundamentally challenges this narrative, especially one that suggests non-divine, non-human entities played a pivotal role in humanity's early development, would represent an existential threat to its spiritual and institutional power. The Anunnaki, with their detailed chronicles of creation, of genetic manipulation, of a pantheon of gods who were demonstrably not the singular omnipotent deity of Abrahamic tradition, stand in direct, unequivocal opposition to the core tenets of Vatican doctrine. Their very existence would call into question the entire framework of faith upon which billions have built their lives, making the suppression of such a truth not merely an act of censorship, but an act of profound, desperate self-preservation. It is this clash of narratives, the ancient Sumerian accounts versus the established biblical canon, that lies at the heart of this unfolding enigma, a battle for the soul of history itself. The Vatican's deep roots stretch back to the nascent days of Christianity, evolving from humble beginnings into a global spiritual and temporal power. Its historical trajectory, spanning 2 millennia, is replete with instances of meticulous record-keeping, the careful preservation of texts, and crucially, the deliberate suppression or alteration of narratives deemed heretical or threatening. The early Church, forged in the fires of persecution within the Roman Empire, quickly understood the power of narrative control. As it transitioned from a fledgling movement to an established institution, it systematically absorbed, reinterpreted, or outright eradicated competing spiritual traditions. The vast libraries of Alexandria, the Gnostic Gospels, the pagan cults of Rome, all faced the relentless march of Christian dogma, which sought to consolidate its authority by establishing a singular, definitive truth. This historical precedent provides a chilling template for how a secret of the magnitude of the Anunnaki might be handled. If the early church encountered narratives that depicted humanity as a creation of powerful, flesh-and-blood beings from the stars, rather than the direct handiwork of a benevolent, singular God, the implications would have been catastrophic for their burgeoning theology. Such a truth would not merely be inconvenient, it would be anathema, a poison to the very foundations of their faith. Imagine, then, the discovery of ancient tablets or scrolls, perhaps unearthed during Roman digs, or brought back from the Crusades, a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge, predating even the oldest known biblical texts. These might be Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, or even texts from lesser-known ancient cultures, all whispering the same dangerous story, that the gods of antiquity were not ethereal spirits, but tangible beings who journeyed through the cosmos. Consider a scenario where early church scholars, perhaps during the monumental task of compiling and standardizing religious texts, encountered such material. Faced with accounts of the Anunnaki's arrival, their cities, their creation of humankind, and their eventual departure, they would have been confronted with an existential dilemma. To integrate such narratives would be to dismantle the very nascent structure of Christian belief. To acknowledge them would be to admit that the divine was not what they preached, and that humanity's genesis was not as sacred or as unique as their teachings proclaimed. The choice, from an institutional perspective, would be stark and absolute. Either embrace a truth that would shatter their authority, or bury it so deeply that it would never see the light of day. The historical evidence suggests the latter path was chosen not out of malice, but out of a profound, perhaps even misguided conviction that humanity was not ready for such a radical truth, or that the fragile edifice of faith needed protecting at all costs. This act of suppression would not be a singular event, but a continuous, evolving process, refined and reinforced over centuries, passed down through generations of scholars, cardinals and popes, each sworn to uphold the sacred secret. The very infrastructure of the Vatican, with its layered bureaucracy, its stringent protocols for archiving, and its deep-seated traditions of discretion, provides the perfect environment for such a long-term, meticulously managed concealment. This isn't just about hiding a few documents. It's about shaping an entire historical narrative, subtly redirecting the flow of knowledge, and ensuring that any discordant voices are either silenced or discredited, their theories dismissed as the ramblings of eccentrics or heretics. It's a colossal undertaking, one that requires unwavering commitment and an almost religious devotion to secrecy, ensuring that the true origins of humanity remain forever shrouded in the sacred, yet profoundly unsettling mystery of the Vatican's inner sanctum. The vastness of the Vatican archives, often spoken of in hushed tones, contains not just papal bulls and theological treatises, but also a wealth of secular history, scientific observations, and ethnographic accounts from across the globe. It is within this colossal repository that whispers of anomalous artifacts begin to truly tantalize. Imagine, deep within a forgotten section of the Apostolic Library, perhaps tucked away in a dusty volume, bound in aged leather, a detailed sketch of an object that defies all known archaeological classifications. A small, intricate figurine, described as being discovered in an ancient Anatolian dig, depicts a humanoid figure with a disproportionately large, elongated skull, unlike any known hominid. Its eyes are large, almond-shaped and unnervingly prominent, conveying an intelligence far beyond primitive man. This isn't just a quirky ancient doll. It's a depiction that strangely aligns with certain Sumerian iconography of the Anunnaki, often shown with distinct cranial features. The text accompanying the sketch, perhaps a fragmented account from a Jesuit missionary in the 17th century, speaks of local legends describing sky people who taught their ancestors the secrets of agriculture and astronomy. He dismisses it, of course, as pagan idolatry, but the meticulous detail of his drawing, his almost obsessive cataloguing, suggests a deeper, unacknowledged fascination. Or consider a more recent, yet equally disturbing, hypothetical discovery. In the quiet, less frequented corners of the Vatican museums, among thousands of classical sculptures and Renaissance masterpieces, there might reside an unassuming marble slab. Its surface, worn smooth by the passage of time, bears inscriptions in a language that initially confounded linguists, thought to be an obscure dialect of Proto-Indo-European. However, a closer, more dedicated analysis, perhaps by a renegade paleographer working in secret, reveals startling similarities to early Sumerian cuneiform, not just in structure, but in specific semantic patterns that are almost impossible to dismiss as mere coincidence. The translation, pieced together with painstaking effort, speaks of a great deluge that cleansed the earth, followed by the return of the lords of the heavens, who re-established order and reseeded the lands with the breath of life. This narrative, so eerily close to both the biblical flood and the Sumerian epic of Atrahasis, gains a terrifying new dimension when read through the lens of Anunnaki intervention. The slab doesn't just record a myth. It claims to record an event, witnessed and recounted by those who survived. What if, tucked away in the archives, there are even more direct, more visceral pieces of evidence? Perhaps a series of ancient navigational charts, far too accurate for their supposed age, detailing routes across oceans and continents that early humans supposedly never traversed. Or fragments of metallic alloys, recovered from obscure dig sites in the Levant, exhibiting properties that suggest an advanced metallurgical process far beyond the capabilities of Bronze Age man. Materials that resonate with the descriptions of the Anunnaki's shining chariots and impenetrable shields. These anomalies, even if individually dismissible as curiosities or misinterpretations, when pieced together, begin to form a mosaic of overwhelming contradictions to the established narrative. Each one is a flickering flame in the darkness, hinting at a larger hidden truth. The Church, in its meticulous cataloguing and preservation efforts, would inadvertently become the custodian of these very contradictions. The very act of collecting and archiving these disparate pieces of historical, archaeological, and textual evidence would mean that the Vatican, perhaps more than any other institution on Earth, possesses the most comprehensive, albeit fragmented, dossier on the Anunnaki. This is not to say that every cardinal is privy to this deepest secret, or that every archivist is a knowing conspirator. Rather, it is more likely a highly compartmentalized operation, known only to a select few within the highest echelons, a secret so profoundly sensitive that its protection is considered paramount to the very existence of the Church itself. The weight of such knowledge would be immense, a silent burden carried by generations of spiritual leaders who, perhaps genuinely believing they were protecting humanity from a truth too terrible to bear, perpetuated the greatest deception in human history. The very air within those ancient walls, heavy with incense and the echoes of prayers, would also carry the silent, crushing weight of a monumental secret, a secret that continues to reverberate through the hidden chambers of history, waiting for the moment when it might finally burst forth and rewrite everything. This brings us to the individuals, the intrepid scholars and researchers, often dismissed as fringe theorists or eccentric academics, who find themselves drawn into the perilous currents of this ancient mystery. Imagine Dr. Eleanor Vance, a brilliant but stubbornly independent paleographer at the British Museum, whose quiet, unassuming demeanour belies a fierce intellect and an unyielding commitment to historical truth. Eleanor, in her late 40s, with a perpetually dishevelled bun of ginger hair and spectacles perched precariously on her nose, has spent years poring over obscure Sumerian and Akkadian texts, fascinated by the linguistic nuances that often get lost in standard translations. Her office, a cramped, dusty corner, filled with towering stacks of books, old tea mugs, and the faint scent of parchment, is her sanctuary. She's always felt a prickle of unease with the prevailing interpretations of certain Sumerian creation myths, particularly those that describe the Igigi, the lesser Anunnaki, and their forced labor, and the subsequent creation of humanity, the Lulu Amelu, as workers. The almost industrial nature of these accounts, the functional transactional relationship between the gods and their human creations, felt too stark, too pragmatic, for mere allegorical storytelling. It felt literal. One dreary autumn afternoon, as a typically British drizzle lashed against the windows of the museum, Eleanor was meticulously cross-referencing a newly digitized tablet fragment from Nippur, with an old, obscure translation published in the 1920s by a German Jesuit scholar, Father Klaus Schneider. Schneider's work, largely forgotten and often ridiculed for its unconventional interpretations, contained a peculiar footnote. It referenced a series of previously unknown clay cylinders, supposedly discovered in an archaeological dig near Ur in the late 19th century, but whose whereabouts were now unknown. Schneider's translation of a specific passage from these cylinders described the Anunnaki's descent in terms that were strikingly non-mythological. Instead of poetic metaphors of clouds and divine light, it spoke of metallic vessels that cleaved the sky, glowing with an internal fire, and of beings emerging clad in hardened skins, breathing air through intricate masks. The description, when stripped of its ancient linguistic overlay, sounded uncannily like a technological event, a landing, a spacewalk. Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition, a shiver that had nothing to do with the chilly air seeping in from outside. It was the thrill of intellectual discovery mixed with a growing sense of dread. Her initial research into these missing cylinders led her down a rabbit hole of dead ends, academic denials, and suspiciously sanitized historical records. Every reference to Schneider's later work seemed to vanish after 1935, and his name, once prominent in German Oriental studies, became a footnote in a footnote. Yet the seed was planted. Eleanor began to notice a pattern in various ancient texts she was studying, a subtle but persistent editorial hand, perhaps not of outright censorship, but of strategic omission or purposeful misdirection in translations over centuries. Phrases that in their original Sumerian carried a more literal, physical meaning were often rendered in later Akkadian or Babylonian versions with more abstract spiritual connotations, slowly eroding the specificity of the original narrative. This wasn't merely a matter of linguistic evolution. It was a deliberate softening, a dilution of a potentially incendiary truth. She meticulously charted these discrepancies, creating an elaborate hand-drawn network of connections and divergences on a massive whiteboard that dominated her tiny office. The emerging picture was unsettling. A systematic effort, not by any single individual, but by a continuous stream of scholarly and religious authorities to steer interpretations away from a literal reading of the Anunnaki presence. The true shock came when she started noticing these patterns in early Latin translations of some Mesopotamian texts that had found their way into European monastic libraries during the early Middle Ages. The very institutions tasked with preserving knowledge seemed to be quietly reshaping it, making the ancient gods of Sumer far more palatable for a burgeoning monotheistic world. Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just a linguistic anomaly. It was a conspiracy of silence, stretching back thousands of years. As Eleanor delved deeper, the web of discrepancies tightened around her, threatening to pull her into a vortex of profound and unsettling questions. The more she meticulously compared early Sumerian cuneiform with later Akkadian, Babylonian, and critically early Aramaic and Greek translations that found their way into Western theological discourse, the more evident the pattern became. It wasn't simply a matter of linguistic drift or interpretive nuance. It was a systematic, almost surgical alteration of core narratives. Phrases describing the Anunnaki's crafts that soared on fire became chariots of the gods, transforming advanced technology into mystical conveyance. Accounts of their shining raiment and tools of power morphed into divine radiance and heavenly might, carefully stripping away any suggestion of material rather than spiritual superiority. The initial descriptions of the Igigi, the lower-ranking Anunnaki who toiled in the mines, and their eventual rebellion leading to the creation of the Lulu Amalu, primitive man, as a replacement labor force, were particularly telling. In the earliest Sumerian, the context of genetic manipulation and biological engineering was disturbingly explicit. The goddess Ninti, often depicted with a symbol resembling a DNA helix, was referred to as the Lady of Life, or the Lady who makes life whole, and her role in mixing the essence of the Igigi with the clay of the earth to fashion mankind in their image carried a literal, almost scientific undertone. These passages, however, underwent a remarkable transformation through successive translations, slowly becoming more allegorical, more metaphorical. By the time these narratives reached early Christian theological circles, they were largely reinterpreted as poetic expressions of divine creation, perfectly aligning with the nascent Genesis account of God creating man in his own image. Eleanor found herself constantly battling a creeping sense of cognitive dissonance. The evidence, to her meticulously trained eye, pointed overwhelmingly to a literal interpretation of the Sumerian accounts. The precision of the architectural descriptions of Eridu and Nippur, the advanced calendrical systems, the detailed astronomical observations that included planets unknown until modern times, it all suggested a level of external guidance or direct intervention that defied the accepted narrative of linear human development. She spent countless hours in her small, cluttered office, hunched over illuminated manuscripts and digital scans, the faint scent of old paper and dust filling the air, a constant companion to her solitary pursuit. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was seeking to unearth a truth that had been carefully reburied by previous generations of scholars, many of whom had likely been well-intentioned guardians of religious orthodoxy. The most chilling discovery came when she traced several early Christian commentaries on Genesis, written by influential church fathers in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE. While outwardly adhering to the emerging monotheistic doctrine, some of these texts contained subtle, almost imperceptible allusions to older, more complex creation myths. They spoke of fallen angels who mingled with the daughters of men, and of giants in the earth, passages that were often dismissed as obscure references to local folklore or metaphorical warnings. However, Eleanor's comparative analysis revealed that the language used, The specific phrasing, and even some of the descriptive elements, bore an unnerving resemblance to the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki and the Nephilim, the giants, or those who descended. It was as if these early Christian scholars, while committed to forging a new, unified religious narrative, could not entirely erase the echoes of an older, more literal truth they had encountered in their own extensive studies of ancient texts. They had instead cleverly woven these older threads into the new tapestry of Christian doctrine, transforming extraterrestrial beings into celestial rebels and advanced progenitors into demonic tempters. The implications were profound. The Vatican, through its extensive network of scholars, missionaries, and archivists, would have been privy to these older, unexpurgated accounts. They would have possessed a direct line to the Sumerian narratives, not just as mythological curiosities, but as potentially factual records of a pre-biblical reality. The decision to suppress, to reinterpret, to gently but firmly guide humanity away from this understanding would have been a conscious, deliberate, and sustained act. It wasn't just a matter of defending theological tenets. It was a monumental effort to protect the very spiritual framework of Western civilization, ensuring its stability even at the cost of historical accuracy. The profound gravity of this realization weighed heavily on Eleanor. It wasn't just a scholarly puzzle anymore. It was a moral quandary, a question of intentional deception on an unprecedented scale. Have you ever considered the sheer power embedded in controlling the narrative of human origins? How profoundly it shapes our identity, our beliefs, and our understanding of our place in the universe? It's a question that makes one pause, reflecting on the subtle ways information is curated around us, even today. Comment below if this detail has surprised you, or if you felt a similar unease with certain accepted historical narratives. Your insights are genuinely valuable. The idea that the Vatican, an institution built on the twin pillars of faith and authority, could be knowingly concealing such a monumental truth raises unsettling questions about its motivations. The sheer wealth of ancient texts, historical documents, and archaeological findings accumulated over 2 millennia within its extensive archives would have provided the early church and successive generations of its leadership with an unparalleled panoramic view of human history. Consider the vast networks of scholarly monks and missionaries who, during the Roman Empire's twilight and the subsequent Dark Ages, traversed continents, collecting, copying, and translating every scrap of knowledge they could find. Many of these texts, originating from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and other ancient civilizations, would have contained narratives of creation that predated or significantly differed from the emerging Judeo-Christian narrative. If among these were explicit, undeniable accounts of beings like the Anunnaki, their physical presence, their technological prowess, their role in creating or guiding humanity, the Vatican would have faced an existential crisis of unprecedented proportions. The primary motivation for suppression, from the Church's perspective, would be the protection of its core theological dogma. The monotheistic narrative of a singular, benevolent God, as the sole creator of the universe and humanity, is the bedrock of Abrahamic faiths. The introduction of powerful, non-divine physical beings who descended from the heavens and played an active, interventionist role in human genesis would not merely challenge this dogma, it would utterly shatter it. It would imply that the God of the Bible might be merely one of many, or perhaps even a misunderstood representation of the Anunnaki themselves. The ramifications would be profound. The sanctity of creation, the concept of original sin, the divine lineage of Christ, and the entire framework of salvation would be thrown into disarray. Such a revelation would undermine the Church's claim to divine authority, potentially plunging billions into spiritual nihilism and societal chaos. In their view, perhaps, the truth was simply too dangerous for humanity to bear. They might have believed they were acting as benevolent guardians, protecting the fragile human psyche from a reality too brutal, too alien to comprehend. This perspective, however paternalistic, still represents a conscious decision to control information and manipulate historical understanding. The suppression would not have been a crude, outright destruction of all evidence. Instead, it would have been a far more sophisticated, nuanced process. It would involve strategic reinterpretation, subtle retranslation, the careful categorization of problematic texts as mythological, heretical, or apocryphal, thereby diminishing their historical veracity. It would mean controlling access to sensitive documents, archiving them in restricted sections of the Vatican library, known only to a select few with the highest security clearances. Imagine the quiet acquisition of archaeological finds that tell the wrong story. Ancient tablets, anomalous artifacts, or even human remains exhibiting unusual genetic markers, quietly purchased, spirited away, and filed deep within the Vatican's private collections, far from the prying eyes of independent scholars or the public. The immense wealth and political influence of the Church over centuries would have facilitated such a clandestine operation on a global scale. From the zealous Crusades, which saw vast quantities of ancient knowledge brought back from the Middle East, to the extensive missionary efforts across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, the Church's reach was unparalleled. Each expedition, each conversion, each new territory brought with it potential new pieces of the Anunnaki puzzle, and new opportunities to either incorporate or suppress the information. The existence of the Anunnaki would also challenge the notion of human exceptionalism, suggesting that humanity might not be the singular, divinely chosen pinnacle of creation, but rather a carefully cultivated species, perhaps even a biological experiment. This would fundamentally alter our understanding of consciousness, free will, and our place in the cosmic hierarchy. The Vatican, as a guardian of human dignity and divine purpose, would find such a notion intolerable, a direct assault on the very essence of its mission. The suppression, therefore, becomes not merely an act of self-preservation, but, in their own twisted rationale, an act of protecting humanity itself from a truth they deemed utterly corrosive to faith, order, and meaning. It is a terrifying thought that the guardians of our spiritual heritage might also be the architects of our profound historical ignorance, wielding their immense power to maintain a comforting yet ultimately false narrative of our origins. The actual mechanisms employed by the Vatican to safeguard such a monumental secret would be as intricate and layered as the ancient city of Rome itself. This wouldn't be a crude act of book-burning or wholesale destruction, which would only draw attention and create suspicion. Instead, it would be a far more sophisticated, multi-pronged approach, refined over centuries, becoming an ingrained part of the institution's operational DNA. Firstly, there's the masterful control of key information access. The Vatican Apostolic Library, renowned for its unparalleled collection, is also infamous for its highly restrictive access policies. While open to qualified scholars, obtaining permission to view certain documents can be an arduous process, taking months or even years. Specific sections or secret archives are only accessible to the highest-ranking cardinals and approved researchers, often after signing stringent non-disclosure agreements. This creates an effective bottleneck, ensuring that only a select few with appropriate clearances and implicitly appropriate ideological alignment ever lay eyes on potentially problematic texts. Secondly, the Church has historically demonstrated remarkable skill in reinterpretation and contextualization. Rather than destroying texts that might allude to the Anunnaki, they would be reclassified. Sumerian creation myths would be presented as charming yet primitive attempts by ancient peoples to understand the world, serving as a foil to the superior and revealed truth of the Bible. Any references to gods descending from the heavens could be allegorized as manifestations of angelic beings or even early, crude understandings of the singular God. Passages describing advanced knowledge or technology would be dismissed as symbolic expressions of divine wisdom, conveniently stripping them of any literal, material implications. This subtle semantic engineering ensures that the narratives remain intact, but their meaning is fundamentally twisted to fit the desired theological framework. This isn't overt censorship, but a far more insidious form of narrative control, where the stories are kept, but their interpretations are rigorously policed. Thirdly, there's the tactic of acquisition and sequestering. Over centuries, the Vatican, through its vast network of clergy, archaeologists and scholars, has quietly acquired countless artifacts and documents from around the globe. Many of these would have been purchased, donated, or even rescued from less stable regions. Any object or text that directly contradicted the established narrative or provided too much corroborating evidence for the Anunnaki hypothesis would be identified, acquired, and then meticulously filed away into the deepest, most secure vaults of the Vatican's private collections. These items would not be destroyed. Destruction invites questions. Instead, they would simply cease to exist in the public consciousness, becoming lost or undiscovered for centuries, gathering dust in climate-controlled, hermetically sealed environments, their true significance known only to a trusted few. Imagine crates of clay tablets, meticulously wrapped, labeled with innocuous catalogue numbers, quietly sitting for centuries, each tablet a ticking time bomb of suppressed history. Lastly, and perhaps most subtly, is the control over academic discourse and patronage. Throughout history, the Church has been a major patron of art, science, and scholarship. This patronage, while fostering immense intellectual growth, also carried an implicit understanding. Research that challenged fundamental Church doctrine would find little support, few publishing opportunities, and often led to professional ostracization. Scholars who veered too close to the forbidden truth might find their grants mysteriously cancelled, their academic positions untenable, and their reputations quietly undermined. This chilling effect would discourage many from pursuing lines of inquiry that might lead to uncomfortable revelations, creating a self-policing academic environment where certain topics are simply not discussed or seriously investigated. It's a system designed not just to hide a secret, but to make the very idea of that secret seem ludicrous, unworthy of serious consideration. The genius of this long-term strategy lies in its subtlety and adaptability. It doesn't rely on brute force, but on the enduring power of narrative control, institutional bureaucracy, and intellectual suppression. The walls of the Vatican, then, are not just physical barriers. They are symbolic of the layers of secrecy, misdirection, and carefully constructed dogma designed to keep one of humanity's most profound truths perpetually out of reach, ensuring that the accepted version of our history remains comfortably and reassuringly divine. The maintenance of such a profound secret, stretching across millennia and involving countless individuals, inevitably leaves a human cost in its wake. This is not a tale of dramatic assassinations or cloak-and-dagger espionage, at least not in the overt sense typically portrayed in fiction. Instead, the chilling effect of the Vatican's institutional secrecy manifests in far more insidious, yet equally devastating ways. Imagine a bright, ambitious academic, Dr. Alistair Finch, a senior lecturer in ancient Near Eastern studies at a prestigious Oxbridge University. Alistair, a man in his late 50s with a neat beard and an air of quiet intellectual intensity, stumbles upon the same textual anomalies that caught Eleanor Vance's eye. He publishes a preliminary paper cautiously suggesting a reinterpretation of certain Sumerian glyphs, hinting at a more literal, physical understanding of the Anunnaki's descent. The paper is met with a frosty silence from the established academic community. Peer reviewers raise concerns about his speculative methodology and unsubstantiated claims. What follows is not a direct threat, but a gradual, soul-crushing erosion of his professional standing. His applications for research grants are mysteriously rejected, citing lack of mainstream relevance. Invitations to prestigious conferences cease. Younger colleagues, once eager to collaborate, begin to subtly distance themselves, sensing the unspoken disapproval that now shadows Alistair's name. His lectures, once well attended, see a gradual decline in student enrollment, as a new generation of academics is subtly guided away from his controversial topics. The university administration, while never overtly critical, quietly suggests he focus on more fruitful and less divisive areas of research. The implied message is clear: conform or fade into irrelevance. Alistair, a man dedicated to truth, finds himself caught in an impossible bind. To retract his findings would be to betray his intellectual integrity. To continue would mean professional suicide. This isn't censorship by decree, but censorship by attrition, a slow, methodical strangulation of a career. The psychological toll is immense. The isolation, the quiet dismissal, the erosion of reputation, it can be far more damaging than any physical threat. For scholars who dedicate their lives to the pursuit of knowledge, the loss of their intellectual standing, their ability to contribute to their field, is akin to a form of death. Beyond individual academics, the broader implication of this suppressed knowledge extends to entire fields of study. Archaeology, anthropology, and even theology itself are subtly steered away from lines of inquiry that might unearth uncomfortable truths. Funding for excavations in certain regions, or for research into specific textual anomalies, might be quietly diverted. Publications that present revisionist interpretations might find it impossible to secure mainstream publishers, forcing them into obscure, self-published channels where their work is easily dismissed as amateurish or conspiratorial. This creates a powerful feedback loop. Without mainstream academic validation, the theories remain on the fringe. Without mainstream acceptance, they are deemed unworthy of serious investigation. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of marginalization, effectively quarantining any challenging narratives from public discourse. And what of the physical artifacts themselves? The anomalous objects, the tablets, the skeletal remains that refuse to fit into neat evolutionary boxes. These too could fall prey to this subtle suppression. They might be misplaced in museum archives, damaged during transit, or simply deemed unimportant and left to languish in storage, unexamined and uncommented upon. The very custodians of our shared heritage could, inadvertently or deliberately, become agents of its obfuscation. This isn't a dramatic plot point from a spy thriller. It's a chilling reality of how powerful institutions can shape the landscape of knowledge, not through overt force, but through a pervasive, systemic control of access, funding, and reputation. The human cost, then, is measured not just in ruined careers, but in the collective ignorance of humanity, in the intellectual pathways left unexplored, in the truths that remain forever just beyond our grasp, obscured by a veil woven from centuries of deliberate silence. The echoes of this ancient secret, far from being confined to dusty archives and hushed academic debates, resonate surprisingly loudly in our modern world. Despite millennia of careful suppression, the core narratives surrounding the Anunnaki persist, surfacing in unexpected ways and influencing contemporary thought. We see it, for instance, in the enduring popularity of ancient astronaut theories, which, while often sensationalized, tap into a deep-seated human curiosity about our origins and our place in the cosmos. Programs and documentaries, frequently dismissed by mainstream science, continually explore the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation in antiquity, drawing directly from the very Sumerian texts that Eleanor Vance and Alistair Finch found so compelling. The sheer volume of material, from Erich von Däniken's seminal works to countless online forums, reflects a palpable public hunger for alternative explanations, a collective unease with the neat, linear historical narratives presented by established institutions. This isn't just about entertainment, it's a symptom of a deeper cultural phenomenon, a growing distrust in official accounts, and a yearning for a more expansive, perhaps more challenging truth. The very existence of this robust subculture, dedicated to unearthing what they perceive as suppressed history, is a testament to the Vatican's enduring challenge. How do you completely eradicate a narrative when its core elements are encoded in humanity's earliest written records? Furthermore, there's a renewed focus in academic circles on archaeological anomalies that defy conventional explanation. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dating back over 11,000 years, predate the accepted timeline for complex human civilization by millennia, showcasing sophisticated architectural and artistic capabilities long before humans were supposedly organized enough for such feats. While not directly linking to the Anunnaki, these discoveries fundamentally challenge our understanding of early human development, creating fertile ground for questions about external influences. Could such sites be remnants of advanced knowledge imparted by beings like the Anunnaki, or indeed built with their direct assistance, leaving behind evidence that perplexes modern archaeologists? The more anomalies that emerge, the more cracks appear in the edifice of established history, and the more plausible alternative theories, including the Anunnaki hypothesis, become to a public increasingly wary of expert consensus. The proliferation of information in the digital age also plays a crucial role. Historical documents, once locked away in private collections or accessible only to a select few, are now increasingly digitized and available online, albeit often in fragmented or obscure forms. This democratization of access, however incomplete, empowers independent researchers to piece together clues, to cross-reference texts, and to challenge interpretations that were once considered sacrosanct. The old gatekeepers of knowledge, including the Vatican, find it increasingly difficult to control the flow of information when a determined individual with an internet connection can spend countless hours sifting through newly available data, connecting dots that institutional scholars might have deliberately overlooked. Perhaps most profoundly, the persistence of the Anunnaki secret contributes to a broader phenomenon of growing distrust in established institutions. As revelations of historical cover-ups, scientific misconduct, and political manipulation become commonplace, the public's faith in authority figures, be they governmental, academic, or religious, erodes. The idea that the Vatican, an institution often seen as the moral compass for billions, could be orchestrating a millennia-long deception about human origins feeds into this pervasive cynicism. It reinforces the notion that powerful entities prioritize their own survival and narrative control over transparency and truth, even when that truth concerns the fundamental identity of humanity itself. This contemporary skepticism, while sometimes veering into uncritical embrace of every conspiracy theory, also represents a healthy impulse to question, to scrutinize, and to demand accountability from those who claim to hold the keys to knowledge. The lingering mystery of the Anunnaki, therefore, is not just an ancient historical puzzle. It is a live, potent force shaping modern attitudes towards authority, truth, and our collective human story, reminding us that the past is never truly buried, and its secrets continue to whisper into the present, demanding to be heard. If the Anunnaki were indeed real, not mythical beings, but flesh and blood entities who engineered early humanity, The implications for our species would be nothing short of revolutionary, shattering the very foundations of human identity, philosophy, and spirituality. The first and most immediate consequence would be a profound re-evaluation of human origins. The widely accepted scientific narrative of evolution, while robust in its own right, would be forced to contend with a radical new layer, that our evolutionary journey was either jump-started, guided, or even directly created through advanced genetic manipulation. This wouldn't necessarily invalidate Darwinian principles entirely, but it would add a stunning, complex layer of intelligent intervention, pushing the timeline and mechanisms of human development into entirely new and frankly terrifying territory. Suddenly, the missing links and cognitive leaps that perplex paleontologists might find an explanation, not in gradual natural selection, but in deliberate, targeted enhancement by a technologically superior species. The very concept of humanity would shift from a unique, self-evolving species to potentially a manufactured product, a biological experiment, or even a workforce designed for a specific purpose. This redefinition of origins would inevitably lead to a monumental crisis in religion and spirituality. If the Anunnaki are our true progenitors, then the monotheistic God of Abrahamic faiths, and indeed many other creation deities across cultures, would be cast into severe doubt. Was the singular God a misinterpretation, a collective memory of a powerful Anunnaki leader? Or was the entire religious framework a sophisticated construct designed to control and pacify a developing species, providing a comforting yet false narrative of divine purpose? Billions of people would grapple with the existential dread of realizing that their faith, their moral codes, and their hopes for an afterlife might be based on a foundational deception. The very concept of a soul, of divine grace, of salvation, would need to be re-examined through a radically different lens. This wouldn't just be a theological debate. It would be a deeply personal, often traumatic spiritual reckoning for individuals across the globe, challenging everything they have ever been taught to believe about meaning and transcendence. The Vatican, having been the primary architect of this deception, would face an unprecedented crisis of legitimacy, its moral authority utterly annihilated. Beyond origins and religion, the existence of the Anunnaki would force a complete paradigm shift in science and technology. Their alleged capabilities, interstellar travel, genetic engineering, advanced resource extraction, would offer tantalizing glimpses into what humanity could achieve, or perhaps what we were intended to achieve. Ancient texts describing their sky chariots and tools of power would no longer be dismissed as myth, but studied as potential blueprints for technologies far beyond our current understanding. This could spark a new era of scientific inquiry, focused not just on mimicking Anunnaki tech, but on understanding the underlying principles that allowed them to manipulate biology and physics at such a profound level. However, this advancement might come with a dark side, the realization that we are not alone in the universe, and that our earliest interactions with extraterrestrial life might have been one of subservience rather than enlightened collaboration. This would instill a deep-seated cosmic anxiety, forcing humanity to confront its vulnerability and its true place in a potentially populated and hierarchical cosmos. We would no longer be the sole dominant intelligence on Earth, but rather a species with a complex and potentially troubling lineage. Finally, the Anunnaki secret would demand a fundamental reassessment of human destiny and purpose. If we were created for a reason, to mine gold, to serve as labor, or for some other as yet unknown objective, does that purpose still define us? Are we still bound by the intentions of our creators? Or have we, through millennia of self-development, transcended our initial programming? This question of self-determination, of free will against a backdrop of engineered origins, would become the ultimate philosophical challenge. It would force humanity to collectively decide its own future, to forge its own purpose, perhaps even to emancipate itself from the lingering shadow of its progenitors. The very idea that our gods were once physical beings who walked among us, albeit with a hidden agenda, would ignite a global reckoning, compelling us to confront not just who we were, but who we truly wish to become. It is a future fraught with both immense potential and terrifying uncertainty, a world where every assumption about our past, our present, and our future is irrevocably altered. The journey into the hidden truths of the Anunnaki and the Vatican's potential role in their suppression leaves us, inevitably, with more questions than answers. The curtain of history, woven with threads of myth and meticulously crafted narratives, remains largely intact, yet the insistent whispers from ancient Sumer and the subtle machinations within Rome's hallowed walls continue to challenge its integrity. We have explored the meticulous reinterpretation of texts, the quiet sequestering of anomalous artifacts, and the academic marginalization of those who dare to peel back the layers of deception. We've seen how an institution, ostensibly dedicated to spiritual truth, might find itself compelled to orchestrate a millennia-long cover-up, believing perhaps that it was protecting humanity from a truth too profound, too destabilizing to bear. But the core question lingers, pulsating with an unresolved urgency. Is the truth about our origins a comforting, divinely ordained narrative, or a far more complex, perhaps even unsettling story of cosmic intervention and engineered beginnings? The Vatican, with its unparalleled repository of ancient knowledge and its formidable institutional power, remains the most enigmatic piece of this colossal puzzle. What else lies buried within those vast archives, shielded from public scrutiny by layers of bureaucracy, tradition, and sacred trust? Are there documents, perhaps, that explicitly detail not just the Anunnaki's presence, but their eventual departure, or even hints of their possible return? And if so, what preparation, if any, is being undertaken within the highest echelons of power for such an eventuality? These are not mere academic exercises. They are questions that strike at the very heart of human identity, purpose, and destiny. The implications of a world where our gods were biological, where our creation was an act of genetic engineering, where history itself has been systematically rewritten, are staggering. It would force a global reckoning, a profound re-evaluation of every belief system, every scientific paradigm, and every societal structure we hold dear. The comfortable illusions that have sustained human civilization for so long would crumble, replaced by a reality that is both terrifying and exhilarating in its scope. The challenge, then, is not merely to uncover the past, but to decide what we, as a species, will do with such a monumental truth, should it ever fully emerge from the shadows. The struggle between comforting narrative and disquieting truth is eternal, and in the case of the Anunnaki and the Vatican, it continues to define the very frontiers of our understanding. If this content has ignited a spark of thought within you or broadened your perspective, then please comment below with "Reach the End." It genuinely helps us understand who is truly engaged in this pursuit of deeper knowledge. Like the video if it's made you think differently, and subscribe to the channel right now, hitting that notification bell, because the subsequent episodes of this extraordinary journey will delve even further, peeling back even more layers of what has been hidden. And do click on the content that's already on your screen. It's the natural continuation of this profound investigation. Trust me, you won't want to stop here. There's so much more to uncover.